Thanks for listening to The Handbook, the Agency Operations Podcast. This podcast is brought to you by Scoro. How is a platform like Scoro different from project management tools like Asana, ClickUp, and Monday.com? Those platforms can be useful project management tools, but what they don't do is cover the end-to-end of the agency workflow. What I mean by that is that they're not designed to create your quotes, resource your projects, monitor your budget and financial performance, invoice what you've done, and report on your business. That's the difference between a PM tool and a PSA, professional services automation tool. I think of it like an operating system for your agency that brings together all of these functions and interlinks everything so you're not left with data in silos and having to copy information from one place to the other. Scoro stood out amongst the competition when I was looking for a new platform at my agency. That's why I brought it in. Sign up for a free trial at Scoro.com, or if you arrange a demo call, tell them Harv sent you. Now, let's get to the episode. I'm Harv Nagra. I'm an operations consultant, a former in-house agency operations director, and head of brand communications at Scoro. Welcome to The Handbook, the Agency Operations Podcast, a space where we talk to fellow experts and operations leaders about agency life, discussing the challenges keeping us up at night, as well as strategies that help make things run a little bit smoother. Hi all, welcome back to the podcast. If you're a regular listener, you'll know that I often talk about business maturity, how an agency evolves and optimizes its operations. I find business maturity models an incredibly useful tool to understand where you're at today and what you can aim for. But there's another perspective on maturity, the maturity of your agency's capabilities, what you produce and deliver. This is about the how your agency produces its outputs through the lens of its people, processes, technology, and the use of information. The journey of maturity, whether it's operational or capability focused, is never really over. There's always something new to optimize, refine, or improve. That's why I'm so excited about today's guest, Mike Della Porta. Mike is an award-winning technology and operations leader who thrives on solving big operational challenges. As the former CTO, COO, and CIO at one of the leading independent marketing agencies in the US, Mike led a transformation of the agency's capabilities to innovate and scale, driving record financial success. With 20 years of experience, Mike founded Della Porta Consulting to help agencies scale sustainably while driving profitability and growth. He also helped launch an operations program at one of the leading agency networks in the States, the 4 A's, which we'll be diving into today. Let's see what we can learn from Mike. Mike, welcome to the show. Thank you so much for being here.
Thanks for having me.
Let's start with your background in the agency and tech space. Could you share a bit about your journey with our listeners?
Sure. I am a grizzled 20-year veteran of the agency world. 18 of those 20 years was with one of the leading independent agencies in the States, predominantly focused on media, but we did have a rather large creative practice that focused on a lot of content marketing. But my background is mostly in media. And when I started, we were about 40 people. And toward the tail end of my career, we were knocking on 300 folks. So we just had this incredible growth story that really hockey sticked in the last few years. And during that period of time, I had a chance to really grow with the organization. So I started more on the sort of hybrid role of account management and media planning and buying, where, in a 40-person shop, everybody had to do everything. So I got a chance to wear all of those hats, did my own account management and my own insertion orders and work with vendors to, figure out those contracts, and then billing and reconciliation. So a little bit of everything along the way. And as we started to grow, I had the opportunity to really pursue my passions, which was more on the operations and business intelligence side of things, the technology side of things, and help the organization really develop new capabilities and scale over the last couple of years.
A lot of those areas that you specialize in, we share very common interests in those things. When I first met you, I was really excited to chat with you and have you on the podcast so we could compare notes and talk about some of this stuff. So that's really fantastic. You've done some work with the 4 A's as well, which is a huge network in the US. For those that aren't familiar, can you tell us a bit about who the 4 A's are and what they do? and talk about some of the work that you've done with them.
Yeah, of course. I love the 4As. So for those that don't know, the 4As is basically in the States, it's the Agency Trade Association. It's a wonderful group of people and experts that are there to support agencies of all different sizes and shapes, everything from holding companies to the independents. And as a newly minted chief operating officer, I had approached the 4As and was asking a few questions around generally, where are my people? I'm focused on
Hmm.
business intelligence and technology stuff and operations stuff, and we're looking at project management systems. I'm like, are there peers that I can speak with at other agencies? And there was some really wonderful curriculum and opportunities at the executive level for CEOs and CFOs, but maybe not so much for folks like me, chief operating officers, where I always joke the O and COO is other, right? It really varies from one agency to another. So we
Right.
had talked in the 4As, Molly Rosen in particular, Chick Foxgrover, Sal Conti, a few others had really supported me and hooked me up with a wonderful tag team partner, Kieran Lenz, that the two of us had co-founded and co-chaired what we called as the Agency Operations Business Transformation Roundtable,
Nice.
AOBT for short. And that
Yeah.
was the idea, was bringing together COOs, CIOs, CTOs, folks that were really focused on that tech and operations space for agencies of
Mm.
all ilks, and bringing them together and really talking shop. And it was such a wonderful experience in the sense that everyone was so willing to share. And
Mm.
we really built a fantastic community. So it quickly became the largest roundtable at the 4As. Over the course of maybe 12, 18
Wow.
months,
Yeah.
we drafted a white paper together for the industry. It was more
Mm.
like a best practice and sort of guide for agencies, again, of all sizes, to help navigate the various situations, scenarios, things that agencies were running into.
Amazing. That is so impressive. And I was having a peek at that. The content sounds super relevant and really a playbook that you can reference in terms of
Exactly.
how to go through some of this stuff. You do have to be a member to access that, but you can find out more information about that on the 4A's website. But it's interesting you said, where are my people? And that's something you were kind of missing. I'm based in the UK, as you know, and I've seen the conversation about agency operations grow incredibly, where it was kind of the thing that people didn't really talk about, and you
Yeah.
felt very isolated. And that has changed a lot over the past couple of years. So I'm just wondering, how do you feel things are in that space in the States? Are there more conversations happening as well? Is it being taken more seriously, or do you think there's still a ways to go?
Yeah, 100%. I mean, certainly there's still a ways to go, but I think the biggest change or the catalyst for a lot of this is, agency operations, no matter how you define it, was always sort of more in the background, right? These are sort of the unsung heroes, the work that kind of happens in the seams. It's sort of invisible in a lot of ways, but these are the
Hmm.
folks that really help the agency, whether it's running the agency, the operations of the agency or delivering services to clients. These are the people that kind of act as the glue. They make
Hmm.
everything go. And I
Hmm.
think what's happening over the course of time, and technology is really the catalyst, is that as things are getting more complicated and clients have a lot more expectations around ROI and transparency, security, and other capabilities that agencies are really starting to get into,
Right.
these folks are graduating from being more behind the scenes and invisible to being billable. And so
Hmm.
we're moving these
Mm.
professionals, these sort of Swiss Army knife type folks that can do a lot of different things. We're moving them
Right.
forward in the process and engaging with clients. And I think the agencies that are doing that proactively are going to benefit greatly by
Mm.
introducing the clients to these types of professionals, and they can really influence the quality of the work and the ideas and the innovation up
Mm.
front, as opposed to maybe historically really just being focused on doing things better, faster, smarter, or
Yeah.
fixing things.
I really love that, Mike. And I haven't really spoke to anyone that's put it that way in terms of these roles becoming billable, which I think is music to the ears of any kind of MD or CEO of an agency.
For sure.
That is really interesting. But you're right. The more complex things get and the more technology comes into play. And that's one aspect of the role of an operations director, right? But we've often had to just apply that behind the scenes and in-house. So yeah, I can see the value of that when you lend out that kind of expertise to a client.
100%. And it's tricky, right? Because, whether you're more veering towards the analytics side, the creative side, the media side,
Hmm.
Typically agencies are hired for their core competencies, but
Right.
every agency is stretching in these different directions. And again, I think the catalyst is largely driven by technology, and whether it's technology and software development, AI, things that would have been done behind the scenes to just
Mm.
make things go. Now
Hmm.
these are becoming capabilities and projects that clients are interested in, and they could and should be billable.
Very, very interesting. So one of the things that we're talking about today is business maturity. To start, could you maybe tell us what a business capability maturity model is for anyone that's not familiar?
Sure, it's a really wonderful tool that acts as a framework for the organization to assess what your capabilities are. So these are things that, to put it in simplest terms, these are things that you do. So how good are we at doing the things that we're hired for, or doing the things that we need to do in order to run a business, an agency? It's a great framework to get everybody around a document where there's common language, common definitions of what good looks like, and how do
Hmm.
we continue to improve over the course of time.
So tell us a bit more about what that looks like, the number of stages maybe, and the dimensions that come into play.
Yeah, so typically, and there are all kinds of different versions of this, but what they all tend to have in common is it's a 5 point scale, one
Mm.
being the lowest, five being the highest. And usually, what you're looking for is this graduation from level 1 to 2 to 3, all the way up to five in some cases. The idea is that you're evaluating your capabilities through a common set of definitions and attributes, criteria. And you
Hmm.
look at these capabilities through the prism of people, process, technology, and information. And so it's a really, again, nice way for a leadership team or those that are in charge of departments, divisions, capabilities to assess how they're doing and really consider what a roadmap looks like, and being clear about what your ambition is at the in the grand scheme of things, right? It doesn't make sense to be a rock star at everything. It's actually
Hmm.
cost prohibitive to do that in a lot of cases. But where do you really want to place your bets in terms of investment and resources to
Mm.
really shine on the things that your agency needs to stand out for the most,
Hmm.
and then hedge a little bit on the other things that maybe aren't as important or would be characterized as more kind of supportive in nature.
And really gives you a steer on kind of the gaps that are causing you the biggest issues as well, so you can start to unblock
Exactly.
those. Yeah. So in terms of kind of assessing yourself, and we'll be going into each of the stages in a little bit more detail, so you can walk us through and visualize
Yeah.
what that looks like. But in terms of assessing your capabilities against these, is there a formal way you recommend doing it?
I mean, so it depends, I suppose, on the size and the scope of what you're trying to accomplish. There's certainly software platforms out there,
Hmm.
and there are companies that and consultants that focus on this specifically. I was very lucky to be a customer of Gartner for a long time. So Gartner, in my view, is a wonderful organization that really helps with this sort of thing. But if you don't have the ability to take advantage of those types of resources, you really can put this together in something that amounts to like Excel or a
Mm.
deck, just some basic tool that gets the information down on paper, recorded so that it's shareable and knowable. And you
Hmm.
can get your leadership team around it and revisit it, maybe on a quarterly basis.
So, Mike, even if someone isn't familiar with the idea of a capability maturity model, their business might get to a point where they still recognize there's a need to change. I'm sure you can think of some examples. What
Absolutely.
kinds of things do you think lead to those realizations that we need to mature?
Sure. So I think two of the classics for any agency is we've just won a monster new client. We're so excited, but oh my goodness, our processes and our tech, maybe our people, it all needs to level up in order to capitalize on the opportunity and deliver on the promise that we just
Hmm.
made. Right. So it's not that anything was necessarily wrong. It's
Mm.
just not big enough or scalable enough. It doesn't have the kind of agility that you need to take on that new big piece of business. The other one that tends to pop up, and this starts to dovetail into where you start on a capability model typically, is on that level one. You
Mm.
might have somebody that's just an absolute rock star at
Mm.
what they're performing, but because they're the only person that knows how to do that thing, if they're sick, if they go on vacation, if they leave the organization, you have
Mm.
that sort of hit by a bus situation. In other words, there's no redundancy in place. So if that person isn't there doing their thing, everything stops. And so again, if they're awesome at what they're doing, but they're the only person that knows what they're doing, congratulations, you're a one on the capability model. And one of the things that you need to work on is that buddy system, getting the tag team in place, building the redundancy, starting to get stuff down on paper so that it's trainable and you can work on that within the organization so that if and when that person isn't around anymore for whatever reason, you have somebody else that can slide right in.
I had a client at one point that would constantly bring up the example of getting hit by a bus, that so and so is the only person in your organization that is controlling those. You need to make sure we're going to be okay if something goes wrong. But
Yeah,
yeah.
or another one I see all the time, and for folks that have been on the operations side of things, most of the time when I got the phone call, it's because it was something new that we had never done before, and so we needed to figure it out, right? It
Yeah.
was maybe something brand new that just came up, and it was this amazing opportunity, or maybe it was like an extension and evolution of something that we were already doing, but we
Hmm.
needed to harden it, we needed to scale it, and so that was typically one of the times I would get the phone call. The other time is when something needed to be fixed. It was broken or it was something that wasn't as good as it could be. And so how do we focus on improving it? And so, a lot of times you might have somebody that's a practitioner of a certain capability or function or maybe even a service that you're developing for your client. And in the
Hmm.
agency world, there's those old adages of fake it till you make it.
Hmm.
And maybe you have that one person that's doing their thing, but now the question comes up, well, we're doing this for one customer. How do we do it for two customers? How do we do it for three customers? And when that
Hmm.
moment happens, you kind of have to step back and say, okay, what is it about what this person is doing or this combination of people, process, and tech that we can replicate and scale and deliver on the promise for multiple clients and take advantage of that opportunity?
100%. We're going to be talking about, we're going to start by talking through the stages, but we're going to come back to this point as well. So why don't we get into those stages? I mean, the first two maybe not particularly mature. How do you differentiate between those two?
Yeah. So, I mean, different words for level one and level two, but typically level one is initial, right?
Hmm.
You're either starting out, you've never done it before, and you're starting it,
Hmm.
or it's perhaps something that you've been doing for a while and it hasn't received the kind of time and attention or maybe the investment required in order to do it consistently, right? So,
Hmm.
the way that this tends to feel when these activities are happening at a level one is it's kind of confusing. It's maybe a little bit messy. Firefighting comes to mind, right? It's very ad hoc is
Yeah.
sort of the point, right? And so some activities make sense for that. Maybe they happen every once in a while, but if it's something that you really need to build out and scale, that's when you need to start looking at a capability model and saying, okay, what are the things that we need to change? Again, through the prism of people, process, tech, and information to start to mature this. So moving up from initial to level two, which would be characterized as managed,
Hmm.
that starts to feel like you have the buddy system in place. You have more than one person that can perform these things. It's repeatable. There's shared knowledge, maybe within a team or a department where they can back each other up. And the point there is that rather than it being really ad hoc and there's not a lot of definition around like what good looks like, in level two, it starts to take shape and you can start to say, hey, I know that we did this thing really well and we can train it up and we can start to do it on a regular basis.
Mm.
Or, another common scenario is it's sort of a decision around whether or not to outsource, right? So
Mm.
maybe this is something that early on, because it was project based, you're outsourcing to a trusted partner. And over
Hmm.
the course of time, because the work is more consistent and repeatable, you decide to insource it. Or maybe it's the opposite, that you're doing something in house because everybody has to do everything. And as you start to grow, you can pick and choose your battles in terms of what you're specializing in. And maybe you look at that work that's a bit more commoditized and send it off to an expert, a trusted partner that can perform those things. And you focus on really what sets you apart from your competition and what makes your customers the happiest.
Absolutely. So, Mike, from there, we move into stage three. Tell us what that is and what that looks like.
Sure. So, in my view, and especially in my experience, I think stage three is generally what a lot of organizations should be shooting for. Roughly right. When you start talking about fours and fives, and we'll get there,
Mm-hmm.
starts to ratchet up what the cost and investment is there. But for number three, it's really where the definition of good is really well understood and you can perform it. It's really at the department level, the division level, multiple practitioners at that point. And to translate it, simply said, it becomes your bread and butter, right?
Mm,
These are the things that maybe your agency is known for now. What it feels like, it's routine. It's understood because
mm,
you have that common definition of what good looks like. You can get a group of people together and have a retro or a post-mortem and have a really great conversation around, hey, here's how we did. Here, the next time we do it, because we know what's coming up, here are the things that we want to change and improve. So it really becomes institutionalized in terms of knowledge at that point. I think once you're really at that 3 level, or you're shooting to be at that 3 level, that's where technology and process really becomes important. So
mm,
what I've seen in my career is a lot of things that would be characterized as maybe manual in nature, or things that
mm,
you've built in spreadsheets. This is the point where you're probably in the market to look at software
mhm,
to help digitize and automate, or at least set the circumstance for that sort of approach. And
mhm,
so again, it's sort of a neat thing in the sense that as you're building up towards the capability model and moving up the levels, you start almost creating a requirements document for what technology you might be in the market for, right? You have your
mm,
people in place, processes documented, the work is getting out on
mhm,
time, on cost, everybody is happy. And now it's more a question of, well, how do we harden this? How do we scale it even more? That's
mm,
usually the right moment to start thinking about technology and what solutions are out there.
mhm. Thank you for that. So we're going to talk about stage four, and you also spoke about some of the financial investment that four and five require, which I'm quite interested in hearing about. But first, maybe let's talk about what goes into a level four and start there.
Yeah. So level 4 is really about feedback loops at that point, right? So you have a circumstance where people in process are locked down. A lot of the work is getting captured in software at that point. So you're
Mhm,
creating and capturing information. And so it creates that circumstance for more data driven decision making, whether that's people making the decisions, or you have software and algorithms that are helping to optimize those results or processes for you. It's
mhm,
really about that measurement and understanding that we have a process that's in control. We know what the range is for looking at what's good,
mhm,
and we can manage to that effect. And I think it makes sense for certain things. It makes sense for activities or capabilities that are more tech enabled from the get go. So, some of the capabilities I can think of that really lend themselves to that. Certainly things related to finance, cybersecurity, on the media
mm,
side, programmatic and platform driven media planning and buying. There's so much technology at your fingertips for the
mm,
folks that are hands on keyboard there. They can take
mhm,
advantage of a lot of the functionality that exists within that software and deliver really outstanding results for their clients. But the biggest point there is that the functionality exists. You have to take advantage of it.
excellent. Okay, so level five, what does this stage look like?
This is really about optimization and innovation. So
Hmm.
your maturity has reached a point where you have the data at your fingertips, and you've more or less created that culture of excellence. So everything is firing on all cylinders. You've moved beyond improving the process. You're actually innovating on the process or innovating beyond the process. So it's
Mm,
a really outstanding place to be in the grand scheme. But again, it doesn't lend itself to everything that an agency would be doing.
mm,
And that information and the people that are in those seats interpreting the information and making decisions and ultimately tinkering and innovating beyond the process, that is a really important place to be for new capabilities and where maybe the puck is going.
mm. Excellent. I really think that helps us visualize how we can go from starting out with a new offer or capability all the way to the other end of the maturity scale with a focus on innovation. All right, so we're going to switch gears a little bit. Given your background and experience, I wanted to ask you some broader questions. So, starting with, you talk about the importance of tech and business transformation and the importance of optimizing your tech stack. Can you talk us through that a little bit? Why do you see that as an imperative?
Sure. I think depending on the size of the organization and how quickly you're growing, again, I go back to, it's not necessarily the fact that anything is wrong or
Mm,
broken. It's just
mhm,
maybe not scalable or flexible enough for what your growth trajectory is, right? So
mm,
every agency knows a lot of things are born in spreadsheets
mhm,
and sort of these manual activities. And when you start to grow and scale and you start to invest and you need more people involved with it and you start asking yourself questions around, well, where's the single source of truth for this? And how do I know the status of that? That's where
Mm,
technology can really shine. And so one of my favorite examples is certainly project management systems. I've never met an agency that's been absolutely in love with their project management platform. So I don't believe that, that exists where there's a silver bullet from a PM perspective.
mm,
However, as the agency's growing, there are different considerations for what you may be in the market for. And that's what I mean by evaluating your technology stack every so often, or in my case, I used to do it on a scheduled basis, regardless of what the growth trajectory was. The growth would always pull things, but regardless of the growth, I would always check in on it on an annual, semi-annual basis to make sure
mm.
that everything was working the way that we needed to. And I spent a lot of time on the edges of where the work was, with the
Yep.
folks that were interacting with our clients to really hear firsthand from their experience what they needed so that I could arm them with the best tech and so they could deliver the best service to our clients.
That's really great advice. You also talk about kind of inaccurate reporting, data silos, and endless spreadsheets. And I mean, a spreadsheet is a super easy place to start. So that's why I think, all just kind of gravitate to that when we start doing any planning. But it does get really messy and hard to stay on top of.
Agencies are interesting organizations. I've worked on the agency side for 20 years.
Yeah.
It's just so core to our DNA to be fast, to be first. There's and I can think of times in my career where I was kind of an adrenaline junkie, right? Like I would always love to be where the action is, right? Whether it was firefighting or like something new that we were doing. But the point was is that it was new, it was exciting, it was fast, it was unpredictable.
Hmm.
That sort of flies in the face of a lot of the discipline that you need from a business intelligence perspective to slow down a little bit and adopt more of a mindset of measure twice, cut once, right?
Mm,
So there's this illusion that going fast somehow saves you time when in effect it actually more often than not causes the team to go back in time to fix and correct things that they should have spent a little bit more time focused on in the first place, right? Or maybe partnering with our clients, partnering with our partners, getting the alignment, the stakeholder alignment up front to really understand what are we all trying to accomplish together? Where does
mm,
this information come from? Can we get it? Do we trust it? Like the lineage of information is really important. Um, just simple things like naming conventions and versioning. Are they attachments? Is it up in the cloud? Very, very tactical things
mhm,
that if you have a good handle on can really be a lifesaver in the grand scheme in terms of accuracy and efficiency
mm,
from a data and analytics and BI perspective. So I like to work with teams where, typically the activities are very manual in nature. There's a lot of spreadsheets. And the first place I like to focus on is really just what are the needs? What are those business questions that
mm,
everybody's trying to get a handle on?
mhm,
And developing something, almost a cousin to the business capability model is a maturity framework, or I'm sorry, a measurement framework rather,
mm,
that nails down what are those business questions, what KPIs help us understand the answers to those questions or give us insight. Where does the information come from? And can we draw a
mm.
straight line across all of those things, all before pulling a spreadsheet, typing a number into a piece of software? Let's get
Mm,
that alignment first and make sure that we're all on the same page.
absolutely. So, Mike, when it comes to improving ways of working, sometimes I hear in-house ops people say that I get it and I know this is important, but my MD isn't on board. What would you what would you say to them in terms of advice?
Ops people are great. They can do so many different things. And I think, culturally, that's a really big consideration in the grand scheme in terms of the approach. So culturally, if operations is considered more kind of back office, behind the scenes, maybe just getting the phone call when things are broken and need to be fixed or
Mm,
sped up, knowing that start point is important. And so how do you start to reposition within that circumstance? It's understanding the value that you can create and most
mm,
importantly, it's the value that your stakeholders are yearning for. So if you can
mhm,
understand what that is and how to speak that language and then work with your colleagues and your stakeholders and your leadership to help them
mhm,
understand how you can do that, how you can add that value or create that value, that's the most important part of
mhm,
starting that journey. Ops people, in my view, and I was guilty of this too, we focus a little bit too much on how. We need to
Mm,
focus on why.
mm,
And if we can do that and really get to the heart of that, then we have all kinds of tricks, all kinds of tech and processes and methods and tools, all these things that we can bring to bear on
mm,
creating that value.
mhm,
But understanding that why and getting into the seat of the stakeholder is critically important.
mhm. Absolutely. So, Mike, another thing that I hear ops people say is that they might come into a level one or level two business and they end up feeling really overwhelmed because there's
Yeah.
so much to fix. And it's like every problem I go to fix, I uncover five others. What would you say to them?
Yeah, isn't that the truth? I think a good project charter can be an invaluable tool in the grand scheme because you're right. Inevitably, you'll be sent out on a mission. You'll
Mm,
be doing your thing, and you'll uncover all kinds of interesting things along the way. And
mm,
what I've always told my teams is write that stuff down. Let's report
mhm,
it up and check in on that. But let's
mhm,
be careful not to get derailed, right? In other
mm,
words, if it's not critical to the mission that we're on already, let's
yeah.
see that one through. And we have a backlog of things that, oh, that was interesting, or oh boy, this is going to come back to haunt us in a little bit. Let's circle
Mhm,
back on that stuff once we've completed the initial mission. And I think that's important because it can turn into, I always call these like sort of Frankenstein projects, right? You start
mhm,
off with one thing and then it just starts appending all these different other sort of submissions in the grand scheme. And what ends up happening is you never actually complete anything. And
yeah.
then that starts to undermine your ability and credibility with your stakeholders to do that next thing, right? So important to deliver on that first promise, collect the
Mhm.
intelligence and the things that you've uncovered, and then we can wrap that up in a new project and set off on that.
Really, really good advice. The backlog. I think focusing on the things that are going to be a factor in this project and then just putting the rest
Yeah.
in the backlog is really, really good advice.
I mean, Harb,
So,
another
Mike,
strategy, just building on that quickly, is
yeah.
a new ops person that's been invited to the party on a particular thing. It can be overwhelming. Identifying where the low hanging fruit is really important, right? So, that adage of, let's not boil the ocean. Find something that you can really knock down and create a lot of value, build the stakeholder excitement, the credibility, and
Yeah.
use that as the foundation and the momentum to do bigger things later
Hmm.
on. I think is a really nice strategy. I've seen that work quite a bit.
Excellent. Mike, last couple of questions. Is there anything else you'd say or advice you'd give to someone in an ops role that maybe we haven't covered? Or do you think we pretty well covered the range?
No, that's a great question, and it's somewhat related. I'm teaching business intelligence at my alma mater, the Rochester
Hmm.
Institute of Technology, and I was talking about this with my students. I think for ops people, for business intelligence people, for anybody in that arena, the curiosity is so important, and the collaboration and the relationships are the most important. The
Mm,
tools, the tech, as much as I love technology and everything that's out there and how fast it's moving, it's
mm,
all it's all incredibly exciting. But that
hmm,
stuff is going to continue to change and move and morph into all kinds of things. So how we get the results that we're looking for is a little less important than that why, and building the relationships and understanding your stakeholders.
mm,
So for those that are in the arena or about to enter the arena, I would ask them or encourage them to really focus on the soft skills and the people and the relationship piece
mm,
of it, and the tools and the solutions will swiftly follow.
hmm. I like that. Where do you think the next couple of years is going to take us in terms of like the tech that we use in agencies?
Oh boy. I can answer that in two ways. I mean, certainly everybody is talking about AI and all its different flavors. So,
Hmm.
especially on the media side where everything is so tech enabled and is throwing off so much information, I think there's a wonderful opportunity there to further integrate AI and machine learning. It's always been there. It's always been in the software. That's sort of the
Mm,
funny thing in the grand scheme of things is that, the world in the industry is talking about AI and machine learning as if it's a new thing. I think it's become a bit more in the forefront of the public in the grand scheme where, if you work in ad tech, especially,
Mm,
This has been the case for forever practically.
right.
But with that being said, I think the integration into the workflow and taking advantage of the functionality is really the most important thing. And it's moving so quickly. It's making the time for those people that are hands on keyboard to learn the new bells and whistles and figure out where it applies for their work. So that's really important. And then from an agency perspective, an enterprise perspective, I think it's really looking at your operations staff and your technologists,
Mm,
whether they're formally identified as such or identifying those maybe citizen developers or those high potentials, and really arming those folks with the circumstance and the learning and development, the support to really help them realize their potential, because those folks are really going to be the future leaders of your organization. They're going to be the future strategists. They're going to be the reason that your clients sign up with you. And so those people, and making sure that they're ready and that they're visible and confident and creating a lot of value, that's where I would focus a lot of time and energy.
that is such an inspiring note to end on, and really gives us something to think about. Thank you very much for that. So, Mike, we're coming to the end of our discussion. Can you tell us a bit about the kinds of businesses or agencies that you support and what kind of work you do with them?
Sure. I love working with agencies. It's certainly my background. I have a special place in my heart for agencies. I'm also a Lean Six Sigma practitioner. So where I love to engage with agencies are sort of in two circumstances. Agencies that are looking to grow proactively,
Hmm.
or they found themselves in receipt of growth opportunities. They won that next big client. And in both cases, they're looking to really harden their processes and their technologies. So oftentimes it takes the shape of, hey, we have all of these processes, or we have the technology that we have. Mike, can we partner together? Can you look at what we have and make recommendations on what's scalable, what's not, if we're in the market for new talent, new process, new technology? How do we characterize what that is and make sure that we're making the right choices?
Hmm.
And so, not just helping with the evaluation and recommendation along those lines, but in many cases, helping with the implementation as well, because that's really kind of the hardest part at the end of the day is the change management. You've bought a new system, or you've brought on a new team of people. Everyone's excited for that new thing, that new opportunity, but where the rubber really hits the road is the implementation and the change management, and that's something I specialize in.
Excellent. And do you kind of work across the US then, or kind
I
of
do.
closer?
I do. I'm based in Western New York. Go Bills. But I work with agencies across the country.
Amazing. And if anyone wants to go and learn more about you, Mike, where can they do that?
Sure. I'm very active on LinkedIn, so you can find me there, or I would love a visit at my website at dellaportaconsulting.com.
Thank you so much. Mike, it's been a pleasure to have you on the show. So thank you so much for joining us today.
Oh, thank you for the opportunity. And I love that you're doing this podcast and helping us agency folks and operations get together, share best practices, and learn a little bit.
Thank you so much, Mike. All right, everyone, welcome back. That was a really interesting conversation. I found myself in the past debating the methodologies we followed to deliver certain outputs, discussing how we could simplify, standardize, or speed up the process. And I think Mike's examples really illustrated how you can look at that step by step, from where you're just starting to offer a new capability in your business, and maybe there's just one person taking control of that, over to level two, where you maybe have a buddy system. So there's a couple of people capable of delivering whatever it is. Then on to level three, where it's well systemized and now it's just a standard part of your offer. Mike was indicating that level four and five take considerable more time and cost investment, but there could be advantages in moving to those stages as well, where you become tech and data enabled to really optimize what you're doing. And finally, to level five, where everything is in an excellent state and you can really lean into innovation. Another thing I found really interesting about what Mike was saying early on in the conversation is not only how ops fits into all of the above in delivering those capabilities and maybe designing those methodologies and processes, but how our skills, our approaches, and our use of technology mean that we can actually start to go beyond optimizing in house work and become billable in supporting clients with their work. That's a really exciting thing to think about. It's essentially making the move from operator to perhaps technologist. Now, if you'd like a cheat sheet with the key takeaways from this episode, then head to scoro.com/podcast and sign up for the newsletter. We always drop you an email the week after the podcast episode goes live, so you have the learnings on hand to put into practice. I'm going to leave it there. If you enjoyed this episode, please share it with someone who would appreciate this conversation, and do encourage your colleagues to subscribe to the podcast. I'll be back soon with the next episode. Thanks very much. This podcast is brought to you by Scoro, a platform designed for agencies and consultancies, which allows you to manage your projects, finances, and resources, all from one system. This is a platform I brought in at a previous workplace, which completely transformed the way we worked, and which I've recommended to clients of my own. You can sign up for a free trial on scoro.com. That's SCORO.com. Or reach out to me, Harv Nagra, on LinkedIn if you'd like to hear about some of my experiences.